We saw this blood on the tire. We're like, oh my gosh. And then he came and snatched us. I'm afraid that what they're saying is true and that I was dealing with some sort of monster. A 32-year-old mother, her 2 kids, and a neighbor who just happened to stop by. All 4 of them gone. In my entire law enforcement career, I have never experienced something like this. Sheriff Barber's office. Hi, my name is Valerie. And I work out at Dairy Queen. I'm the general manager out there. One of my employees did not show up for work this afternoon at 4 o'clock. Okay, which is totally uncharacteristic of her. She's not answering her phone, which is totally uncharacteristic. She's not answering her texts either. The missing employee is 32-year-old single mother Tina Herman. Tina and her 2 kids, 13-year-old Sarah Maynard and her 11-year-old brother Cody, live in Apple Valley, a bucolic lakeside community nestled in the rolling hills of Knox County, Ohio. At her manager's request, a Knox County Sheriff's deputy drives out to Tina's house on King Beach Drive to perform a wellness check. When he arrives, Tina's blue pickup truck is sitting in the driveway, but when he knocks on the front door, there's no answer. The deputy peers inside the house through a window. He doesn't see or hear anything suspicious, so he leaves. The next day, Tina is a no-show at work again. This time, her manager decides to take matters into her own hands. This is Deputy S. I can help you. Yes, this is Valerie Haythorne. I called in last night about Tina Herman being missing. MHM, I'm at her house now. I just went inside her home because I'm so worried about her. There's blood everywhere. Okay, just give us a few minutes and we'll be en route. Okay, don't go back in the house. When officers arrive and enter Tina's house, they're confronted with a scene straight out of a horror movie. There's blood in the living room, in the hallway, in one of the bedrooms, and all over the bathroom. As they continue to search the premises, police find bagged groceries sitting in the kitchen and a vehicle parked inside the garage. Only, it's not Tina's pickup truck. It's a Jeep. Police run the tags and discover it belongs to Tina's neighbor, 41-year-old Stephanie Sprang. Officers' attempts to make contact with Stephanie are completely fruitless. It's as if she, Tina, Sarah, and Cody have all vanished into thin air. With a house full of blood and 4 missing people, the Knox County Sheriff's Department mobilizes quickly. They request assistance from the Bureau of Criminal Identification and Investigation and the FBI, and they swiftly organize search parties to canvass the surrounding area. Within hours, news of Tina, Stephanie, Sarah, and Cody's disappearance spreads like wildfire across Knox County. Residents are shocked and deeply scared. Nobody has a bad word to say about Tina, her kids, or Stephanie. The idea that anyone would want to hurt them seems utterly unfathomable. With no obvious suspects or motive, investigators start by taking a closer look at the 2 people closest to Tina and Stephanie, their boyfriends. Under questioning, both men provide alibis, stating they were at work all day, and they deny any involvement in their disappearances. Based on interviews conducted with their employers, police are able to verify they're telling the truth. Both men are cleared. That brings the investigation right back to square one, until authorities uncover a crucial new clue. Inside Tina's garage, police find a shopping bag filled with several items, most notably garbage bags and tarps. The receipt is still inside the bag. It's dated November 11th, and it's time-stamped at 12:08 a.m. That means whoever bought these items did so in the early morning hours, well after Tina's boss first contacted authorities the night before. Detectives obtain a warrant and collect the store's surveillance video from November 11th. Just after midnight, cameras capture a man grabbing garbage bags and tarps off the store shelves. He pays for them with cash and then leaves. Parking lot cameras show the unidentified man exiting the store and driving off. While investigators can't quite make out the car's license plate, they can clearly see it's a silver Toyota Yaris. Using vehicle registration records, authorities compile a list of every person who owns a Toyota Yaris in Knox County. One by one, they methodically rule out everyone on the list until they land on a suspect, 30-year-old Matthew Hoffman. Not only does Matthew fit the physical description of the man captured on tape, He's even wearing the exact same shirt from the surveillance footage in his driver's license photo. And he's got a criminal record, too. In 2000, the Ohio native was convicted of burglary and arson in Colorado and sentenced to 8 years in prison. Records indicate that after his release, he returned to Knox County. Recently, Matthew found himself in trouble again. He was fired from his job at a tree trimming company, and just this past October, his ex-girlfriend had filed a report with the Knox County Sheriff's office accusing Matthew of strangling her. Ultimately, she decided not to press charges. Police find no direct connection between Matthew and the missing victims. But Matthew's current address puts him in Mount Vernon, just 20 miles from Tina's home. Investigators then discover another significant red flag. Matthew's mother owns a home in Apple Valley, less than half a mile from the crime scene. That means he's not only familiar with the area, he knows it well, which makes him an even stronger possible suspect. The next morning, SWAT teams descend on Matthew's house in Mount Vernon and his mother's house in Apple Valley simultaneously. To their surprise, when they knock on Matthew's door, he actually answers. Officers detain him, and he's transported to the Knox County Sheriff's office for questioning. When authorities proceed inside Matthew's home, they're immediately struck by a bizarre sight. The room off the entryway is completely filled with leaves. In the kitchen, they make an even more chilling discovery. There's a decapitated squirrel inside Matthew's freezer. As they continue searching the house, police notice some furniture that's been pushed up against one of the doors. They move the furniture and open the door. It appears to be the entrance to the basement. Inside the basement, officers make an incredible discovery. There on a pile of leaves is 13-year-old Sarah Maynard. She's alive. Officers free Sarah, and she's transported to a nearby hospital for examination. At this point, even though they know the odds of finding the others alive are slim, police still need to locate Tina, Cody, and Stephanie. It is Sunday, November the 14th, and it's approximately 8:57 a.m. At the sheriff's office, investigators cut straight to the point with Matthew. I think you know what we want to talk about, but right now, we need to find some people. Matt, can you hear me? Matt, do you go by Matt or Matthew? We'll give you a minute, man. If you need to think a little bit, just tell us when you're ready. Tell me what I can do to help you. We'll start wherever you want us to start. You want to talk about the weather? We'll do that. Just tell me where they're at. I'll quit talking. Minutes turn into hours, and Matthew refuses to say a single word. We have two families here that are going through hell right now, and you control the strings. You have the ability to help these people. You have the ability to make them feel at ease. You have that ability, and we're here asking you to help us and help them. And ultimately, it will help yourself. You will sleep better again, Matt. You will sleep better again. But you're going to have to own up to what's happened here. You're going to have to take responsibility for what's happened. And you're going to have to show us that you care, that you give a damn, Matt, that you honestly do have a heart. Tell me what you want to do. After almost 3 hours of complete silence, detectives issue Matthew an ultimatum. I'm going to give you one more opportunity before I walk out of this room to tell me where I can go and find Cody, Tina, and Stephanie. One more opportunity, but it's no use. Another investigator steps in and gives it a shot. Hi, Matt. I'm Joe Dietz. I'm a special agent with criminal investigation. I just came down here to help these guys out a little bit. And this morning, since the time that they came into your house, I've been down with Sarah. I don't know if you knew her name, Sarah, but I've been trying to take care of her, helping her down at the hospital, getting the examination and all that stuff done. And, you know, we're doing everything we can to help her understand what happened. At least as much as we know at this point. Yeah, it's obviously going to be a bit rough for her. And she had some questions that I wasn't able to answer, but I told her I would try and talk with you and see if we could get a couple of answers. But Matthew stonewalls him too. Do you remember her asking you about what happened to her mom and her brother? Because she said that she asked you a couple of times. Do you remember that? I don't want to talk anymore. Although Matthew won't talk, Sarah does. At the hospital, the traumatized but remarkably brave young girl tells officers she doesn't know where her mother, her brother, or Stephanie are, or what happened to any of them. Sarah says that when she and her brother Cody came home from school on November 10th, Matthew was already waiting inside the house. We saw this blood on the tire. We're like, oh my gosh. And then he came and snatched us. Cody ran off, and Sarah ran to her bedroom. Matthew chased her down and held a knife to her throat. He tied her up, blindfolded, and gagged her, and forced her to lie face down on the kitchen floor. Terrified, Sarah says she remained there for what seemed like an hour. Then Matthew picked her up, carried her to the garage, put her into a car, and drove off into the night. Eventually, they ended up at Matthew's house. Once they arrived, he took Sarah down to his basement, shoved her onto a bed of leaves, and left her there, alone and scared in the darkness. Over the next several days, as she remained imprisoned in his basement, Sarah says Matthew sexually assaulted her and repeatedly threatened to kill her if she ever tried to escape. Tied up and terrified, she had no other choice but to obey him. The next day, as the search for Tina, Cody, and Stephanie continues, authorities devise a new interview tactic. Yesterday, when Matthew was being processed at the sheriff's office, he willingly chatted with a female deputy. So, they bring in FBI agent Kristen Cadu, hoping she can connect with Matthew on a different level and finally convince him to open up. Do you want me to take the cuffs off so you can actually put this on? You just want to put it around you. You have the pants. No. Okay. Well, they're here if you do. All right. I saw you shiver in there, and I thought it's a little chilly in here. I'm the one that's got the sweater on. So, I can see the pain in your face. Like I said, it's kind of written all over you, and you seem pretty alone with all of it. But you don't have to be. I'd like to help you. Instead of taking a hard line with Matthew, Agent Cadu employs a calm and deeply sympathetic demeanor. Her strategy appears to work. It's okay. It kind of feels better just to let it out. I know it does for me. I think I'm crazy. Why do you think that? Because if I must have done something bad, I wouldn't be here if I didn't. That could be worked through. I'm afraid to even know what it was I did. You're afraid to have me know what you did? I'm afraid to even know what I did. He can only help you. He can't work through something you don't know. Matthew then decides he'd rather be the one asking the questions. So, did you go to Quantico? I did. Was that just for training? Yeah, I was there about 4 months. That's what you have to do to get in. Have you ever been there? I bet your parents are proud. They're proud of me. I hope so. Eventually, their conversation circles back to the crime. You seem very sincere and genuine. Part of me wishes that I could help you. And part of me is afraid to just know what happened. I'm afraid that what they're saying is true and that I'm some sort of a monster. I don't think you're a monster at all. I can't hurt people. I can't. How did you come to have Sarah at your house? I heard her. I found her. Where'd you find her? Tied up. Tied up where? My basement. Just when it seems like Agent Cadu is making real inroads, Matthew shuts down again. But Agent Cadu doesn't give up. They take a short break, and she tries a different angle entirely. How are you doing now? I have something for you. If that looks familiar from your mom. Do you want to read it? Can I do it? Yeah, why don't you go ahead? I can tell you it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. I hear she makes those cards herself. Does it make a difference to you knowing that your mom is going to be there for you no matter what? It's comfort. Are you concerned about whether that's really true, no matter what? Is there still a fear of that? I think in a lot of ways, she's probably already thought the worst, and she's still willing to support you. So I don't think you have to worry about how bad it is and how she's going to feel about that. I think she's going to respect you as a man so much more if you come straight with it and allow us to bring the people home one way or the other. That's going to mean so much more. We know they're out there and that they're most likely dead, but still, you can bring closure to these families. We have to have the bodies so the families can have closure, and that will help you get a better outcome in this, which is very important for your family and for your mom, so that you can still be there for her someday. I think it's weighing heavy on you, and you're afraid that if you tell us, it's going to hurt you with the case. But it's the exact opposite. It's really the exact opposite. I told you. I don't remember. I can't help you. Despite her best efforts, Matthew won't admit to anything. Detectives decide to call it a day. Hey, Tom. He called jail and asked them to send somebody up to escort him back. No, you got to do a little workout. 48 hours after Sarah Maynard was discovered alive in Matthew Hoffman's basement, police still have no idea what he did with her mother Tina, her brother Cody, and their neighbor Stephanie Sprang. After 2 full days of indulging Matthew's self-pity and stall tactics, investigators have had enough. They're telling me the prosecutors are pushing to have you brought in for a hearing. And this is it. This is your last chance to talk to us. Literally. Unless there's a lawyer present. That's what they're pushing for. You're saying you're still willing to talk to us without an attorney, but they're moving forward with that right now. So this is your last chance. They'll make decisions for you. Literally, they'll take that away. They make it sound like it's your freedom, but really, they won't give you that chance. It's really not in my best interest to talk without a lawyer. It's your best interest. And hopefully we've built enough trust for you to know we're not lying to you when we tell you that it does help you in the end. You got to think of your family and yourself and how that's going to look. They're going to be the ones you have to face in the end. Your mom has been pressing us to say, just do the right thing and tell them where they are, and I will be there for you. That's what's going to give her pride, knowing that you are honest. And this is your last chance. Still, Matthew refuses to divulge any more information. But 2 days later, with the death penalty now squarely on the table, he changes his mind. In a written confession, Matthew says he came up with a plan to rob Tina's house. On the night of November 9th, he parked his car at some nearby ball fields and camped out in the woods directly across from Tina's home. The next morning, November 10th, he watched and waited until he was sure Tina and her kids had left for the day. Around 10:30 a.m., he entered the house through the garage. While he searched the home for money and jewelry, he heard Tina's truck pull into the driveway. He ran and hid in one of the bedrooms. When Tina walked in, all hell broke loose. He struck her multiple times in the head with a blackjack. Suddenly, Stephanie Sprang appeared inside the house and began yelling at Matthew. In a state of panic, he grabbed a knife and stabbed both women to death. He carried their bodies into the bathroom and began dismembering them, placing their body parts in a garbage bag he'd found inside the home. Before he could finish, Sarah and Cody arrived home from school. When they spotted him, they both ran. Matthew caught Cody first and stabbed him to death. He then found Sarah hiding in one of the bedrooms, but he couldn't bring himself to kill her, so he kidnapped her instead. He transported Sarah to his house and left her in his basement. Around midnight, he drove to the store where he purchased additional garbage bags and tarps. Then he returned to the crime scene to finish what he'd started. Once he was done dismembering the victims, he loaded their body parts into Stephanie's Jeep and drove to the Kokosing Wildlife Preserve. There, he rigged a pulley system and concealed the victims' bodies inside a hollow tree trunk. Next, he drove the Jeep back to the crime scene and parked in the garage. His plan was to take Tina's truck, go get gasoline, come back, and burn the entire house down. But something was wrong with Tina's truck, so he abandoned it nearby, got back in his own car, and left. That same day, aided by Matthew's written confession and a hand-drawn map, authorities descended upon the Kokosing Wildlife Preserve. Inside a 70-foot-tall, hollowed-out tree, they recovered multiple garbage bags. Inside those bags were the bodies of Tina Herman, her son Cody Maynard, and their neighbor Stephanie Sprang. Afterwards, at a press conference, Knox County Sheriff David Barber issued a statement. As a sheriff of this county for the past 18 years, I have never experienced a case this big, this serious, and this tragic. And in my entire law enforcement career, I have never experienced something like this. The following evening, Knox County residents gathered together to hold a candlelight vigil in remembrance of the victims. On January 6, 2011, Matthew Hoffman pleaded guilty to multiple charges. It's been indicated to me it's your desire to enter a guilty plea to counts 1 and 2 of the indictment. Charges of aggravated murder, an unclassified felony. Is that a correct statement? It's also been indicated to me it's your desire to enter a guilty plea to count 3, an additional charge of aggravated murder under a different statute, an unclassified felony. Is that a correct statement? It's also been indicated to me it's your desire to enter a guilty plea to count 4, a charge of aggravated burglary, a first-degree felony. Is that a correct statement? Yes. Desire to enter a guilty plea to count 5, a charge of kidnapping, a first-degree felony? Correct. Yes. And is it your desire to enter a guilty plea to count 6, a charge of rape, a first-degree felony? Yes. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Over a decade later, even though justice has been served, the senseless brutality of this case continues to haunt Knox County residents and law enforcement investigators alike. And even though she's a grown woman now, to those who remember this tragic case, Sarah will always be the young girl who survived the unthinkable. Sarah Maynard survived something that no child, no person should ever have to endure. 4 days in the basement of a killer. 4 days of darkness, fear, and uncertainty. For days not knowing whether she would ever see sunlight again. And yet, somehow she did. But surviving the ordeal was only the beginning of a much longer journey. In the weeks and months that followed the rescue, Sarah was placed in the care of family members while social workers and trauma counselors worked closely with her. Those familiar with her case described her as quietly resilient, a girl who had been through the unthinkable and was now trying, one day at a time, to find her footing in a world that had been completely torn apart. She had lost her mother, she had lost her brother, she had lost the life she knew, and she carried all of that weight on the shoulders of a 13-year-old. Knox County, meanwhile, was left grappling with questions that had no easy answers. How does a community heal from something like this? How do neighbors look at each other the same way again? How do parents send their children to school without that cold knot of fear sitting in their stomachs? For many residents, the candlelight vigil held in the days after the discovery of the bodies was the first step. Hundreds of people turned out, people who knew Tina and Stephanie personally, and people who had never met them but felt the weight of the tragedy just the same. Candles flickered in the November cold. People hugged strangers. And for a brief moment, a community that had been shaken to its core stood together in the darkness and refused to let grief have the final word. But grief is a long memory. Tina Herman was, by every account, the kind of mother who put her children first, always. Friends and co-workers describe her as warm, dependable, and deeply devoted to Sarah and Cody. She worked hard. She showed up. She was the kind of person you could count on, the kind of manager who knew her employees by name and asked about their lives. Her boss, Valerie Haythorne, the woman who made that first panic phone call to the sheriff's office, later described Tina as one of the best people she had ever worked with. Cody Maynard was 11 years old. Classmates and teachers remembered him as an energetic, good-natured kid, the kind of boy who made friends easily and lit up a room just by walking into it. He had his whole life ahead of him, a whole life that Matthew Hoffman took in a matter of seconds. Stephanie Sprang was a neighbor and a friend. She had simply come over that morning, a routine visit, the kind that neighbors make all the time without a second thought. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and she paid for it with her life. Her family was left devastated, struggling to make sense of a loss that made no sense at all. 3 people, 3 lives, gone because a man with a history of violence and mental instability decided that what was inside Tina's house was worth more than the people who called it home. In the aftermath of the case, investigators and journalists began piecing together Matthew Hoffman's history, and what emerged was a deeply troubling portrait of a man whose dangerous trajectory had been visible for years. His criminal record began in 2000, when he was convicted of burglary and arson in Colorado. He was just 19 years old. The arson conviction alone should have been a significant red flag. Fire setting is widely recognized by forensic psychologists as one of the behavioral markers associated with escalating violence. He was sentenced to 8 years and served his time. When he was released, he came back to Ohio. Back in Knox County, Matthew struggled to reintegrate. He bounced between jobs, eventually landing work at a tree trimming company, a job that, notably, gave him detailed knowledge of the area's geography, its wooded terrain, its hollow trees. He was eventually fired. The reasons were not publicly disclosed, but his employment there would later take on an eerie significance. Then came the incident with his ex-girlfriend. In October 2010, just 1 month before the murders, she filed a report with the Knox County Sheriff's Office accusing Matthew of strangling her. Strangulation, one of the most statistically significant predictors of future lethal violence in domestic abuse cases. And yet, because she ultimately decided not to press charges, nothing happened. No arrest, no intervention, no follow-up. 1 month later, Tina Herman, Cody Maynard, and Stephanie Sprang were dead. It's a pattern that law enforcement officials and victim advocates have seen repeated in case after case across the country. A history of warning signs that go unaddressed until it's too late. After the Hoffman case, advocates in Ohio renewed calls for stronger strangulation laws and better protocols for following up on domestic violence reports, even in cases where the victim ultimately chooses not to pursue charges. During the days Matthew spent being interrogated at the Knox County Sheriff's office, investigators got brief, unsettling glimpses into the way he thought about himself and what he had done. His conversation with FBI agent Kristen Cadu was particularly revealing when he said, "I'm afraid that what they're saying is true and that I'm some sort of monster." He wasn't expressing guilt in the conventional sense. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was, by many accounts, performing a kind of detachment, treating his own actions as if they had happened to someone else, as if he were a passive observer of his own violence rather than its author. Forensic psychologists who later reviewed the case noted that this kind of dissociation is not uncommon in individuals who commit acts of extreme violence. It is a psychological mechanism, a way of creating distance between the self and the act, allowing the individual to continue functioning without being overwhelmed by the full weight of what they've done. Whether Matthew was genuinely dissociated from his actions or simply using the language of dissociation as a manipulation tactic is a question that experts debated for years afterward. What is clear is that Matthew Hoffman was not, by any clinical definition, an impulsive killer. His actions that morning were deliberate. He had camped out in the woods the night before. He had waited and watched. He had a plan, even if that plan went catastrophically sideways the moment Tina came home unexpectedly. The murders were brutal and unpremeditated in their execution, but they occurred in the context of a premeditated criminal act. That distinction mattered enormously when it came time for prosecutors to build their case. On January 6, 2011, Matthew Hoffman appeared in Knox County Court and entered guilty pleas to multiple counts. 2 charges of aggravated murder, 1 additional charge of aggravated murder under a separate statute, aggravated burglary, kidnapping, and rape. The plea deal was the result of negotiations that had been ongoing since shortly after his arrest, in exchange for his cooperation, specifically for providing investigators with the written confession and the hand-drawn map that led them to the bodies. Prosecutors agreed to take the death penalty off the table. Instead, Matthew Hoffman was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For some residents of Knox County, the plea deal felt like a necessary evil. It spared the families the agony of a prolonged trial. It brought closure, or at least the procedural version of it, more quickly than a full criminal trial would have. And it ensured that Matthew Hoffman would spend the rest of his natural life behind bars. For others, it felt deeply insufficient. 3 people were dead. A child had been kidnapped and sexually assaulted. And a man responsible would live out his days in a prison cell rather than face the ultimate consequence for what he had done. Sarah's family, for their part, said very little publicly about the plea deal. Their focus, understandably, was on Sarah, on protecting her privacy, on supporting her recovery, and on trying to give her some semblance of a normal life in the years ahead. In the years following the case, Sarah Maynard kept an extremely low public profile, something that those who knew her situation understood completely. She had been the victim of crimes so severe, so invasive, that the idea of public exposure on top of everything else she had endured would have been almost unbearable. What was known was that she continued to receive counseling and support, that she was surrounded by people who loved her, that she was slowly and painfully trying to rebuild. Trauma researchers who study child survivors of violent crime note that recovery is rarely linear. There are setbacks. There are anniversaries that open old wounds. There are ordinary moments, a smell, a sound, a shadow in a doorway, that can bring everything flooding back without warning. For a child who experienced what Sarah experienced, those triggers are everywhere, and learning to live with them is a lifelong process. But researchers also note something else, something that feels important to say out loud. Survivors of extreme trauma are not defined solely by what happened to them. They are whole people with futures and possibilities and capacities for joy that exist alongside the pain. Sarah's story did not end in that basement. It continued, and by all indications, she chose to keep going, which, given what she had been through, is an act of extraordinary courage. For the broader community of Knox County, the Hoffman case left a mark that time has softened but never fully erased. Apple Valley, the lakeside community where Tina and her children lived, is the kind of place where people move precisely because it feels safe. Quiet streets, neighbors who wave to each other, kids who ride their bikes without parents hovering over them. The case shattered that sense of safety in a way that took years to begin to repair. In the months after the murders, residents reported a significant change in the way the community operated day to day. People locked their doors who had never locked them before. Parents who had let their children walk home from school started picking them up. Neighbors who had never really spoken began checking in on each other. And then, as months became years, life gradually resumed its rhythms. New families moved in. Children were born. The community moved forward, not forgetting, but finding a way to carry the memory of what happened without being consumed by it. The Knox County Sheriff's Department used the case as a catalyst for updating its protocols around wellness checks and missing persons reports. Sheriff David Barber, who had called it the most serious and tragic case of his 18-year career, spoke publicly about the need for law enforcement agencies to be more aggressive in the early hours of a missing persons investigation, particularly when children are involved. Perhaps the most haunting detail of the entire case, the one that lingered longest in the public imagination, was the hollow tree. The Kokosing Wildlife Preserve is a beautiful place. Rolling terrain, dense woodland, the kind of landscape that feels ancient and undisturbed. Matthew Hoffman knew it well. He had worked in and around those woods. And somewhere in that landscape, in the hollowed-out trunk of a 70-foot tree, he had hidden what remained of 3 human beings. The image stayed with investigators long after the case was closed. Knox County Sheriff's Detective Gary Wilkerson, one of the officers who responded to the scene, later described the moment they opened those garbage bags as one that he knew would stay with him for the rest of his life. There are things, he said, that law enforcement training doesn't prepare you for. That was one of them. The tree itself became a kind of grim landmark in the local consciousness, a place that people drove past on the way to somewhere else and tried not to think about too hard. Nature reclaimed it, as nature reclaims everything. But the knowledge of what had been hidden inside it never quite went away. As of the time of this documentary, Matthew Hoffman remains incarcerated at a state correctional facility in Ohio, serving his life sentence without the possibility of parole. He has given no public interviews and made no public statements since his guilty plea in January 2011. He will never walk free. He will never again camp out in someone's woods, watching their home, waiting for the moment to strike. He will never again have the opportunity to hurt another family the way he hurt the Hermans, the Maynads, and the Sprangs. For the investigators who worked the case, that fact provides some measure of satisfaction, even if the satisfaction is cold and incomplete. Justice, in cases like this one, is never fully adequate to the crime. You cannot give back what was taken. You cannot undo what was done. You can only ensure that it doesn't happen again. And in this case, at least they did that much. True crime, as a genre, can sometimes reduce real tragedies to the level of puzzle or spectacle, something to be consumed and then set aside. But behind every case like this one, there are real people whose lives were permanently altered. There's a family that set a dinner table for 4 and now sets it for 1. There's a community that learned the hard way that evil doesn't announce itself. There's a sheriff who, after 18 years on the job, said he had never seen anything like it and meant every word. And there is Sarah Maynard, who was 13 years old when the worst thing imaginable happened to her, and who found, somehow, against all odds, a way to keep going. Whatever life has brought her since that November, she deserved every good thing in it. She earned it in that basement, in the dark, on a bed of leaves, waiting for someone to find her. And someone did. She was 13 years old. She survived 4 days in a killer's basement. And when it was all over, The justice system gave her one thing: a courtroom, a guilty plea, and a man in handcuffs being led away forever. But nobody told her what came next. Nobody prepares you for the part after the rescue. The part where the cameras go away, the investigators move on to the next case, and the community slowly stops talking about it. The part where you have to figure out how to go to school, how to make friends, how to sit at a dinner table with two empty chairs and somehow keep eating. The part where surviving is not the end of the story. It is only the beginning of a different and far more private one. Sarah Maynard's name became known across the country in November 2010. But the years that followed, the years that mattered most to her actual life, played out almost entirely out of public view. And that is exactly as it should be. Because Sarah was never just a case number or a headline or a symbol of survival. She was a child. And children deserve the chance to grow up without the weight of the world's gaze pressing down on them. What we do know is that she kept going. And in the world of trauma recovery, that is not a small thing. That is everything. The science of trauma tells us something important about what happens to the human brain after an event like the one Sarah endured. When a person experiences extreme fear and helplessness, particularly over an extended period, as Sarah did across those 4 days, the brain undergoes real and measurable changes. The amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for processing fear, becomes hyperactive. The prefrontal cortex, which governs rational thought and emotional regulation, becomes less effective. The nervous system recalibrates itself around survival, around constant threat detection, in ways that can persist long after the threat itself is gone. This is what clinicians call post-traumatic stress disorder. And for survivors of prolonged captivity and abuse, the symptoms can be particularly complex and layered. Flashbacks, nightmares, hypervigilance, the constant, exhausting feeling that danger is always just around the corner. Difficulty trusting people. Difficulty feeling safe in spaces that should feel safe. Difficulty sometimes simply existing in a world that kept moving while you were frozen in a basement in November. Recovery from this kind of trauma is not a straight line. It is not a process with a clear beginning, middle, and end. It is, for many survivors, a lifelong practice, something you work at every single day, something that gets easier in some ways and harder in others, something that never fully resolves, but that you gradually learn to carry without being crushed by it. The mental health professionals who work with survivors like Sarah describe recovery in terms of phases. The first phase is stabilization, establishing physical safety, basic routines, a foundation of trust with at least one other person. The second phase involves processing the trauma itself, carefully and gradually confronting what happened in a way that the brain can begin to integrate rather than simply suppress. The third phase is reconnection, rebuilding relationships, re-engaging with life, finding a sense of identity and purpose that exists outside and beyond the trauma. None of these phases happen quickly. None of them happen in a straight line. And all of them require something that is often in short supply for survivors who have been through the criminal justice system: privacy, patience, and the freedom to heal on their own terms rather than anyone else's timeline. By every indication, Sarah had people around her who understood that. People who protected her. People who gave her the space she needed. In whatever road she walked in the years after Matthew Hoffman was led away in handcuffs, she did not walk it alone. That matters more than most people realize. Research on long-term outcomes for child survivors of violent crime consistently shows that the single greatest predictor of recovery is not the severity of the trauma itself. It is the quality of the support system surrounding the survivor in the aftermath. Children who have stable, loving adults in their corner, adults who believe them, who protect them, who do not treat them as broken or damaged or defined by what happened to them, consistently show better outcomes than those who face the aftermath in isolation. Sarah had that. And so, whatever the road looked like, the foundation was there. Meanwhile, in Knox County, the years after the Hoffman case brought their own slow process of reckoning. Communities, like individuals, go through their own version of trauma recovery. And Knox County had been hit hard. This was not a large urban area accustomed to high-profile violent crime. This was a quiet, close-knit community of roughly 60,000 people in central Ohio. The kind of place where people knew their neighbors, where kids played outside until dark, where the idea that something like this could happen felt not just shocking, but genuinely impossible. And yet it had happened, right here, on a quiet street in a lakeside neighborhood that people moved to precisely because it felt safe. The psychological term for what Knox County experienced in the aftermath of the Hoffman case is collective trauma. The shared emotional wound that a community sustains when a violent event shatters its sense of safety and trust. Collective trauma manifests in ways that are both visible and invisible. Visible in the locked doors, the changed routines, the children who are no longer allowed to walk home from school alone. Invisible in the anxiety that settled into people's chests and never quite left. In a way that certain streets and certain addresses took on a heaviness that ordinary life could not quite dissolve. Communities heal from collective trauma the same way individuals do. Slowly, imperfectly, and only with time. Knox County held its vigil. It buried its dead. It watched Matthew Hoffman plead guilty and get taken away. And then, as communities do, it tried to move forward. New families moved into Apple Valley. Children were born who would grow up never knowing the name Tina Herman or Stephanie Sprang or Cody Maynard, except perhaps as a story their parents told them once and then never mentioned again. The lakeside remained beautiful. The hills remained rolling. The community remained, scarred but intact, changed but still standing. And slowly, year by year, the wound began to scar over, not heal. Scars are not healed wounds. Scars are wounds that have closed over and hardened and become part of the landscape of a person or a community permanently. You do not forget a scar, but you learn to live with it. You learn to move through the world, carrying it without it being the only thing you are. Knox County learned that, is still learning it. For the law enforcement officers who worked the case, the years after brought their own particular weight. Investigators who work violent crimes carry what they see with them in ways that the public rarely fully appreciates. The images do not leave. The details do not fade. The faces of the victims, the faces they knew only from photographs and evidence files, stay with them in ways that are difficult to articulate and impossible to fully explain to someone who has not experienced it. Sheriff David Barber had been in law enforcement for 18 years when the Hoffman case landed on his desk. He had seen things. He had worked cases that would have broken most people. And yet he stood in front of the cameras after it was over and said, with complete sincerity, that he had never experienced anything like this. Not in 18 years. Not in his entire career. That is not a statement made for effect. That is a man telling the truth about what something cost him. About what it cost to do this work, to carry these cases, to go home at night and sit across the dinner table from your family and try to leave the job at the door when you know, because you have seen it with your own eyes, exactly what the worst of humanity looks like up close. The officers who searched Matthew Hoffman's basement and found Sarah Maynard alive carry that memory too. It is, by any measure, one of the best moments a law enforcement officer can experience. Finding a missing child alive when everyone feared the worst. But it exists alongside every other memory from that case. The house on King Beach Drive, the bathroom, the garbage bags, and the hollow tree. The things that law enforcement training, however thorough, however well designed, does not and cannot fully prepare you